I was halfway through recalibrating a jammed sorting arm at 3 o'clock in the morning when I noticed my name misspelled for the third consecutive time on the glossy project announcement banner hanging near the ceiling. Congratulations to the automation team led by Grant Hollister. 3 entire years of sweat, grease, and burning midnight oil across a massive 180,000 square foot fulfillment facility, and executive leadership could not even spell my last name correctly on their victory banner. That was the precise moment I realized this facility was never going to offer genuine professional recognition. It was simply another corporate grind, where your reward for solving critical infrastructure failures was having someone steal your lunch from the break room refrigerator and receiving another passive-aggressive email about expense receipts. My name is Daniel Vance. I am 48 years old, and for 36 grueling months I served as the lead automation systems architect at Transglobe Logistics Incorporated. When conveyor lines ground to a sudden halt or sensor relays misfired during peak operational hours, it was always my responsibility to clean up the mess. Yet the only time executive leadership acknowledged my existence was when the main office laser printer ran out of toner, and nobody else knew how to unlatch the paper feed tray. Most weekdays began with a 15-minute morning sync that inevitably devolved into a 2-hour finger-pointing marathon. Lyle Montgomery from procurement would drone endlessly about quarterly component budgets, while Sonia Bradshaw from corporate marketing complained that the autonomous mobile units on the warehouse floor did not look photogenic enough for promotional videos. Meanwhile, I was rewriting back-end synchronization code until 4 in the morning, praying the primary sorting grid would not crash during peak inventory shifts. Executive leadership kept boasting to shareholders that we were engineering for the future of automated supply chains. I was beginning to realize I was merely constructing an early grave for my own sanity. The early months of the expansion project had been a complete nightmare. Transglobe was losing thousands of dollars every hour due to constant communication dropouts between autonomous mobile units and the central server. The corporate bosses refused to invest in custom engineering solutions, insisting instead on purchasing cheap, off-the-shelf, industrial sync modules supplied by their preferred commercial vendor. Those standard vendor units were notoriously unreliable, overheating whenever ambient temperatures inside the facility climbed above 75 degrees, or when processing loads exceeded 80% capacity. After the third vendor module burned out its circuit board and halted fulfillment operations for 6 straight hours, I decided I had tolerated enough corporate incompetence. I went home to my private workshop, a small rented storage unit behind an auto repair shop that smelled of motor oil and cost $125 a month. There, surrounded by spare components and diagnostic scopes, I retrieved a custom industrial controller I had designed and built 7 years ago. I named the unit Vortek. It was not a sentimental gesture. Vortek represented 7 years of personal engineering discipline, exhaustive testing, and meticulous craftsmanship. Housed in an anodized steel chassis the size of a shoebox, Vortek possessed a custom multi-bus architecture capable of processing real-time sensor telemetry at speeds far beyond anything commercial vendors offered. More importantly, before I ever brought Vortek near Transglobe property, I protected my intellectual property meticulously. I had registered Vance Control Systems LLC as a private corporate entity 7 years prior. I filed utility patent applications under Title 35 of the United States Code Section 271 for the proprietary hardware architecture and copyrighted the underlying embedded firmware code under Title 17 of the United States Code Section 106. When I installed Vortek into Dock Bay 3, I did not announce it as a grand invention. I simply informed Grant Hollister that I was testing a custom diagnostic module to stabilize our robotic routing. Management never questioned how the system suddenly stopped crashing. They did not care about internal bus speeds or thermal regulation as long as their daily throughput graphs showed green arrows for executive review meetings. Every single piece of company-owned equipment at Transglobe required purchase order numbers, asset registration tags, and sign-offs from procurement. Vortek had none of those. It entered the facility inside my personal leather satchel. I updated its firmware directly from my private laptop, and I wrote its diagnostic scripts within Advanced Control Systems' private development repository. I deliberately never submitted an expense voucher or reimbursement request for Vortek. My father had taught me 40 years ago that if you build something truly valuable with your own hands, you never let a corporate entity write a check for it. The moment a company pays even $5 toward a prototype, their legal department claims exclusive ownership. Because Transglobe never spent a single dollar on Vortek, the hardware and firmware remained 100% the sole property of Advanced Control Systems LLC. Day after day, Vortek quietly managed the entire warehouse. 200 autonomous mobile robots navigated intricate paths across 180,000 square feet without a single collision. While corporate executives strutted through executive suites boasting about their groundbreaking operational efficiency, Vortek was translating 6 different communication protocols into one flawless symphony of steel and logic. CTO Gavin Hallowell even gave an interview to an industry trade magazine, taking full credit for what he called his internal engineering triumph. Nobody asked who built the black box mounted in Bay 3. Nobody cared who updated its code during weekend maintenance windows. They simply assumed it was another piece of corporate furniture. I watched them steal the credit, and I remained silent, knowing that their entire $24 million operational structure was running on a piece of technology they did not own. By the end of the 3rd year, our automated fulfillment facility was functioning with unprecedented accuracy and speed. Demonstration Day arrived, marking the formal presentation of our system to Apex Freight Logistics, a major regional distributor preparing to sign a $24 million long-term contract. Corporate executives flooded the warehouse floor in tailored suits and gleaming safety vests, accompanied by media crews, investors, and public relations staff. During the live demonstration, Vortek performed flawlessly. 200 autonomous mobile units glided along magnetic floor tracks, picking, sorting, and scanning thousands of packages per hour. Inventory tracking accuracy reached 99.6%, and the entire loading dock operated with surgical precision. The visiting executives from Apex Freight Logistics were visibly impressed, clapping enthusiastically as Grant Hollister and Gavin Hallowell gave theatrical speeches about Transglobe's technological superiority and vision. Bottles of expensive champagne were opened in the executive conference room to toast the milestone. I stood quietly near the back of the room, sipping water from a paper cup, watching people who had never touched a soldering iron take full credit for 3 years of my relentless work. The celebration did not last long for me. By Thursday afternoon, I noticed a strange shift in management behavior. Morning sync invites vanished from my digital calendar without explanation. Access to high-level engineering Slack channels and repository admin panels was restricted overnight. I walked past Conference Room B and saw Grant Hollister, Sonia Bradshaw, and HR Director Norris Sinclair whispering behind the frosted glass doors. Their hushed voices and sudden silence when I walked past confirmed my worst suspicions. They had already decided that now the system was online and stable. My senior salary was an unnecessary line item on their financial ledger. They believed the hard part was done, and that any junior technician could maintain what I had constructed. On Friday morning at 9 o'clock, a mandatory meeting appeared on my calendar. The invitation had no agenda, listing only HR Conference Room 2 for a duration of 15 minutes. When I entered, Nora Sinclair was sitting behind a polished glass table with a manila folder and a practiced corporate smile. Grant Hollister stood by the window, avoiding direct eye contact. Nora slid a stack of standard termination documents across the desk and explained in a rehearsed tone that Transglobe was restructuring its engineering department. She stated that since the primary automation build was complete, my position as lead systems architect had become redundant. Nora informed me that because my employment classification was structured as a project-based role, there would be no severance package. Access to company email and network servers would terminate at 5 o'clock that evening, and security would escort me out of the building once I packed my desk. Grant Hollister offered a brief, empty handshake, remarking that the company appreciated my hard work during the initial setup phase. He added with a patronizing smirk that I should take pride in having contributed to such a successful corporate asset. I looked at the severance waiver and exit forms. They were standard boilerplate documents containing non-disclosure covenants and property return acknowledgments. Nowhere in the paperwork was there any mention of Vortek. The legal team had compiled a checklist of company-owned laptops, monitors, and building access badges, but they had completely overlooked the hardware box humming inside Dock Bay 3. In their haste to eliminate my salary and claim sole credit for the automation system, they assumed every machine on the floor belonged to Transglobe. I signed the exit forms, calmly using my own blue ink pen, keeping my demeanor completely composed. I knew that screaming or expressing anger would serve no purpose. Corporate arrogance had blinded them to the most fundamental technical reality of their facility. They believed the system was running on proprietary Transglobe software that would continue operating indefinitely without intervention. They had no idea that the entire warehouse AI was relying on a real-time hardware controller that belonged exclusively to Vance Control Systems LLC. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I packed my personal tool set into my leather bag and walked out of the building accompanied by a junior security guard. The afternoon sun was bright and the parking lot was quiet. As I placed my toolbox into the trunk of my car, I felt an intense sense of clarity and peaceful resolve. The 3 years of disrespect, stolen credit, and late-night exhaustion were over. Transglobe believed they had successfully discarded an expensive senior engineer while retaining his life's work for free. They did not realize they had just cut the thread, holding their entire enterprise together. When I arrived at my home office, I did not waste a single minute dwelling on frustration or anger. I opened my legal files for Vance Control Systems LLC and retrieved the master utility patent records under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, alongside the original firmware registration certificates under Title 17, Section 106. Then I drafted a formal legal document titled Commercial Hardware and Intellectual Property Licensing Agreement. The terms of the agreement were straightforward, precise, and unyielding. Vance Control Systems LLC offered Transglobe Incorporated a non-exclusive, non-transferable commercial license for the ongoing operational use of the Vortek Precision Industrial Sync Controller version 4.2. The monthly licensing fee was set at $65,000, payable in advance on the first of each month. The agreement explicitly stated that any unauthorized operation of Vortek without a valid license constituted willful patent infringement, copyright violation, and breach of fiduciary duty under federal commercial law. I printed the agreement on heavy cotton paper, set it aside, and prepared for the next step of my plan. On Monday morning, I met with my longtime friend and intellectual property attorney, Rachel Thornton, at her office downtown. Rachel had spent 20 years handling complex technology litigation and patent enforcement for major industrial corporations. She sat behind a mahogany desk, reviewing my original patent filings, corporate registration documents, and the commercial license agreement I had drafted. Rachel carefully examined every clause, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. She confirmed that because Transglobe had never issued a purchase order for Vortek, had never listed it on their corporate asset ledger, and had signed an employment contract containing explicit carve-outs for pre-existing personal intellectual property, Transglobe possessed zero legal ownership of the hardware or firmware. She explained that if Transglobe continued to utilize Vortek to fulfill commercial contracts without paying the $65,000 monthly licensing fee, Vance Control Systems could initiate federal litigation under Title 35, Section 271 for patent infringement, seeking immediate injunctive relief and treble damages. Furthermore, Rachel pointed out that if Transglobe attempted to reverse engineer or tamper with Vortek's internal circuit architecture, they would be committing clear violations of Title 17, Section 106, alongside potential claims for conversion and intentional interference with contractual relations. She also noted that Transglobe's failure to provide proper notice during employee restructuring violated statutory standards under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101. She gave a sharp nod of approval, stating that my legal position was airtight, untouchable, and fully enforced by established commercial precedent. After leaving Rachel's office, I logged into Vance Control Systems' secure remote server. When I originally programmed Vortek 7 years ago, I embedded a security subroutine known as a cryptographically signed heartbeat check. Every 30 days, Vortek's internal microcontroller sent an encrypted ping to my private server requesting an updated operational license key. If Vortek received a valid digital handshake, it continued running at maximum efficiency. If the heartbeat ping failed for more than 72 consecutive hours, Vortek's internal firmware entered a progressive safety throttling protocol, gradually reducing system synchronization speed to prevent thermal overload and hardware fatigue. If the authorization key remained unrenewed after 30 days, Vortek initiated a mandatory hardware lockout, safely halting all connected robotic relays and freezing system memory. The 30-day countdown timer had officially started on the day of my termination. TransGlobe had exactly 30 days of operational runtime remaining before Vortek would enter full lockout mode. I did not alter the code or install malicious subroutines. The safety lockout was a standard built-in feature designed to protect proprietary hardware from unauthorized commercial exploitation and unauthorized deployment by third parties. Meanwhile, TransGlobe launched a massive public relations campaign across industry media outlets. Company press releases flooded trade publications, declaring that TransGlobe had engineered a revolutionary autonomous logistics platform completely in-house. CTO Gavin Hallowell appeared on industry podcasts, boasting about how his internal development team had eliminated operational bottlenecks through proprietary corporate innovation. Promotional videos featured sweeping shots of the warehouse floor, showing 200 robots moving in harmony while executive commentary praised Grant Hollister's leadership. Not a single press release mentioned my name or acknowledged the existence of Vance Control Systems, LLC. I watched the promotional videos from my home desk while drinking coffee. The corporate leadership was reveling in their public victory, entirely oblivious to the ticking clock inside Dock Bay 3. On Tuesday afternoon, I sent a certified legal package directly to TransGlobe's general counsel, Meredith Hallowell. The package contained a formal notice of proprietary hardware presence, a copy of the utility patent certificates, and the commercial hardware licensing agreement requiring $65,000 per month. Attached to the cover letter was a simple printed statement: Vortek operational license expires in 21 days. Prompt execution of the enclosed agreement is required to maintain system stability. 2 days after the legal package was delivered, I received a tentative email from Megan in TransGlobe's accounting department. She asked if I could provide historical asset tags or internal invoice numbers for the diagnostic module located in Dock Bay 3 to complete end-of-quarter documentation. I ignored the email. 24 hours later, a staff attorney from TransGlobe left a voicemail asking for a brief phone call to clarify equipment ownership records. I did not return the call. By the end of the second week following my departure, internal tension at TransGlobe began to surface rapidly. A junior DevOps technician named Toby Jenkins, whom I had mentored during his first year at the company, sent me a private encrypted text message. Toby reported that management was frantically searching internal procurement databases for any record of Vortek's purchase or manufacturing history. When they realized no corporate documentation existed, Grant Hollister called an emergency meeting with senior engineering staff, demanding to know how an unlisted hardware module had become the central controller for the entire facility. Senior engineers attempted to inspect the module, but Vortek's anodized chassis was locked with tamper-evident security seals, and its internal microcontroller was protected by military-grade hardware encryption. When an engineer tried to connect an external diagnostic scanner to Vortek's maintenance port, the controller immediately rejected the unauthorized signal and triggered a localized safety pause, bringing 3 conveyor lines to a temporary halt. Toby texted me that the engineering team was completely bewildered and panicked. The 30-day timer continued its relentless countdown, and Transglobe was fast running out of options. By the middle of the third week, the impact of Vortek's built-in safety throttling protocol began to manifest clearly across the fulfillment floor. Because the 30-day license key had not been renewed, Vortek entered its secondary protection phase. The controller began intentionally delaying robot routing calculations by a fraction of a millisecond per transaction to prevent unauthorized data accumulation and thermal stress on connected relays. I watched these developments remotely through Vance Control Systems' telemetry portal. With absolute calm and composure, every technical metric confirmed that Transglobe's executive team was drowning in self-inflicted chaos. To an untrained observer, the warehouse still appeared functional, but overall system efficiency began to degrade steadily every single day. Autonomous mobile units experienced slight lags when negotiating intersection points along the magnetic floor grid. Package scanning times increased, and inventory tracking updates began lagging by up to 3 hours. Daily throughput numbers dropped by 25% across all operational shifts, causing massive backlog queues to accumulate at every loading bay and frustrating floor supervisors. Lyle Montgomery from procurement screamed at warehouse supervisors during morning meetings, demanding to know why shipping targets were being missed. Supervisors blamed software glitches, while senior engineers admitted off the record that they could not recalibrate the system without access to Vortek's proprietary source code. Meanwhile, executives from Apex Freight Logistics were scheduling their final pre-implementation audit. They sent representatives to inspect the facility and verify that shipping speeds met the rigid benchmarks specified in their $24 million contract. During the audit, visiting Apex Freight representatives noticed visible congestion along the main sorting lines. Pallet robots queued at dock doors waiting for routing instructions, and digital tracking boards flashed warning indicators. When Apex Freight executives questioned Grant Hollister about the delays, he nervously claimed the facility was undergoing routine maintenance updates. However, the client's technical auditors were not easily fooled. They requested a full technical audit of system architecture and documentation before signing the final contract. Panic swept through the executive suites at Transglobe. CTO Gavin Hallowell instructed the IT department to attempt a complete system bypass by replacing Vortek with a standard commercial vendor module. A team of 4 engineers spent 24 consecutive hours wiring a vendor unit into Dock Bay 3 and attempting to upload cloned system logic. The result was disastrous. The moment the vendor module attempted to interface with the warehouse sensor network without Vortek's proprietary firmware authorization, system bus voltages spiked unexpectedly. 30 pallet robots suddenly stopped in place, triggering an emergency safety shutdown across the main conveyor line. A shipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars was delayed by 12 hours while technicians scrambled to restore basic manual operations. Senior engineer Dave reported directly to Gavin Hallowell that cloning or replacing Vortek within 30 days was technically impossible. He informed the CTO that without Daniel Vance's proprietary controller, the facility could not function. On Wednesday morning, HR Director Nora Sinclair sent an email with the high priority flag to my personal account. The tone was vastly different from our termination meeting. Nora wrote that Transglobe was open to discussing a mutually beneficial consulting arrangement to assist with system optimization. She requested an immediate meeting at corporate headquarters to explore collaborative solutions and adjust terms. I replied 4 hours later with a brief, professional message. I informed Nora that Vance Control Systems LLC did not engage in informal verbal discussions regarding proprietary hardware assets. I attached the commercial hardware licensing agreement once again, emphasizing that the monthly fee of $65,000 remained firm. I added a live digital link to a countdown clock hosted on my server, showing that exactly 6 days and 14 hours remained before Vortek initiated complete hardware lockout. On Thursday morning, Grant Hollister called my personal phone number 3 times. I allowed the calls to go directly to voicemail. In his third message, his voice sounded strained, cracked, and desperate. He insisted that my refusal to cooperate was harming the company and warned that TransGlobe's legal department was preparing to take legal action to protect corporate assets. I forwarded the voicemail transcript to Rachel Thornton. Rachel immediately drafted a formal legal response to TransGlobe's general counsel, Meredith Hallowell. The letter detailed the exact provisions of Title 35 United States Code Section 271 and Title 17 Section 106. Rachel noted that any attempt by TransGlobe to seize, tamper with, or force open property owned by Vance Control Systems LLC would result in an immediate federal lawsuit for patent infringement, statutory copyright damages, and intentional conversion of property. She added that Vance Control Systems would also file for an emergency federal injunction to halt all operations at the facility until legal title was resolved in court. Upon receiving Rachel's letter, Meredith Hallowell immediately convened an emergency meeting with the board of directors. She informed the executive team that TransGlobe's legal standing was non-existent. She explained that if Vance Control Systems filed for an injunction, federal marshals could physically seal Dock Bay 3, bringing the entire $24 million operation to an immediate standstill. The countdown clock on my server continued to tick downward, 4 days, 12 hours, 8 minutes. On Friday morning at 4 o'clock, the 30-day operational license timer officially expired. Inside Dock Bay 3, Vortek completed its final system ping. Receiving no signed cryptographic renewal key from Vance Control Systems server, the controller executed its mandatory safety shutdown protocol. Across 180,000 square feet of warehouse space, every automated component ceased operation simultaneously. Conveyor belts slowed to a quiet stop. 200 autonomous mobile robots froze in their tracks along the magnetic floor grid. Sorting gates locked in neutral positions, and digital terminal screens across the facility transitioned from active operational displays to a static red message. Hardware license expired. Contact Vance Control Systems LLC for authorization. The floor manager stood helplessly near the main control console, unable to explain to arriving technicians why the entire automated infrastructure had reverted to an inert state overnight. The shutdown was clean, controlled, and absolute. There were no electrical surges, no damaged components, and no lost inventory data. Vortek simply disengaged its control relays, returning the facility to an inert state. By 6 o'clock in the morning, warehouse supervisors arriving for the early shift found complete gridlock. At 7 o'clock, Grant Hollister arrived at the facility and attempted a hard power reset of the main distribution panel. System screens power cycled, but the moment the boot sequence reached the core controller interface, Vortek refused to initialize without a valid digital security key. At 8:30 in the morning, executive leadership from Apex Freight Logistics arrived for their scheduled final contract signing meeting. They walked into a dead facility where 200 robots stood motionless, and hundreds of workers sat idle in break rooms. When the visiting executives demanded an explanation, Gavin Hallowell attempted to blame unforeseen technical anomalies. The lead representative from Apex Freight listened for less than 5 minutes before stating that Apex Freight could not partner with a logistics provider that lacked basic infrastructure stability and transparent technology ownership. He announced that Apex Freight was suspending contract negotiations immediately and departed the facility. By 11 o'clock that morning, news of the operational collapse reached trade news outlets. TransGlobe's stock price dropped rapidly as reports circulated that their flagship automated facility was completely paralyzed. Within 30 minutes of the news breaking, the board of directors held an emergency session and voted unanimously to terminate CTO Gavin Hallowell and suspend Grant Hollister pending an internal corporate investigation. At 12 o'clock noon, my phone rang. The caller was Meredith Hallowell, TransGlobe's general counsel. Her tone was completely stripped of corporate posturing and arrogance. She stated that TransGlobe was prepared to accept all terms set forth by Vance Control Systems LLC. She emailed a fully executed copy of the commercial hardware licensing agreement, signed by the chief executive officer, agreeing to pay $65,000 per month for the ongoing lease of Vortek, alongside a $35,000 initial reconciliation fee for past unauthorized usage. I reviewed the signed document and informed Meredith that while the hardware licensing agreement was now active, restoring operational functionality required an additional technical agreement. I explained that Vance Control Systems LLC provided commercial hardware leases, but system initialization and operational integration required specialized engineering consulting services. I emailed a second document titled Emergency Technical Consulting Agreement. The terms specified an 8-month consulting engagement at 4 times my previous monthly salary, payable entirely upfront before system restoration. The agreement stipulated that I would report directly to the board of directors, maintain a private, lockable office on site, and retain complete personal ownership of all future intellectual property created during the contract period. Meredith Hallowell hesitated for less than 2 minutes before confirming that the board had authorized full approval. Within 1 hour, $35,000 in reconciliation fees, $65,000 for the first month's hardware lease, and the full upfront consulting payment were wire transferred directly into Vance Control Systems LLC's corporate bank account. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I walked back through the front doors of Transglobe Logistics. I was not wearing an employee badge. My security pass bore the title Master Automation Consultant and President of Vance Control Systems LLC. Junior technicians and warehouse workers looked on in quiet amazement. As I walked past Grant Hollister's empty office toward Dock Bay 3, I opened my laptop, connected a secure encrypted cable to Vortek's maintenance port, and uploaded the new digital authorization key. Within 90 seconds, Vortek's status indicators shifted from solid red to glowing green. Systems initialized smoothly across the entire facility. Conveyor belts began humming, sorting gates aligned, and 200 autonomous mobile units resumed their precise movements along the floor grid. System synchronization reached 99.6% accuracy instantly. I unhitched my laptop, locked Vortek's steel housing, and walked into my new private office. 3 years of corporate disrespect, stolen credit, and underhanded tactics had ended not with shouting, but with absolute technical and legal vindication. Transglobe was finally paying full market value for the technology that kept their empire alive, and Vance Control Systems LLC held the keys to their future.